Welcome to the Forgotten Narrator. There are some truths so terrible that even in a galaxy drenched in heresy, war, and damnation, they remain unspoken. Not because they are unknown, but because to speak them would crack the very foundations of loyalty, honor, and faith. The Dark Angels, the First Legion, bear such a truth. A secret betrayal, ancient and festering, buried beneath layers of duty and silence. Long before the fires of the Horus heresy consumed the Imperium, before the traitor Primarchs turned their blades on Terra, another wound had already been carved deep into the heart of the Emperor's dream. And it came not from a known enemy, but from the Lion's own blood. From brothers, from fathers, from sons. This is not a tale of Horus. This is the first betrayal. The one they still hide from the Emperor. Lionel Johnson was not born to greatness. He carved it out of the darkness with blood and silence. On the haunted, death-shrouded world of Caliban, where twisted beasts hunted beneath a canopy so dense it blocked out the stars, a feral child emerged from the forest. No name, no tribe, no language, only instinct and violence. They called him the Lion, not as a title of nobility, but because he was something other. Regal and terrifying, a creature shaped by war before he was ever touched by mankind. Even among the other Primarchs, his origins feel more myth than history. While others were raised by kings, scholars, or seers, Johnson was raised by the dark, and it never left him. He grew up alone in the wilds, hunted and hunting, until he was discovered by the Order, a knightly brotherhood seeking to bring order to Caliban. There he met Luther. And though they were not kin by blood, their bond became one of deep dependence. Johnson brought strength and vision, Luther brought charisma, loyalty, and humanity. Together, they purged the beasts from Caliban's forests and unified its people. The Lion, mysterious and powerful, became a messianic figure. But even in triumph, he remained distant. He did not laugh easily, nor trust freely. He was precise, cold, and burdened by something that even he could not name. Caliban gave him everything, yet it never truly felt like home. Not in the way Terra might have. Not in the way that the Emperor might. When the Emperor finally found him, the Lion accepted his place as Primarch with solemn inevitability. He was not awed by the Emperor as some of his brothers were, nor did he rebel as others would. He simply folded it into the Imperium like a sword into its sheath, ready to serve, but never to kneel. That same reserved temperament defined his command of the First Legion. He took the ancient and storied Dark Angels and made them sharper, colder, and less comprehensible. They became an echo of his own paradox, absolute in loyalty yet cloaked in silence. In many ways, the Lion was the Emperor's mirror, a being of impossible expectation, holding together contradiction with sheer will. And like the Emperor, he struggled with his humanity. Though he led men and commanded their awe, he was not of them. He could walk through halls filled with cheering warriors and feel nothing. His vision for order was immaculate, but unbending. He distrusted emotion, loathed dissent, and held a deep, almost pathological need for control. Where Horus won hearts, the Lion won wars. And in that difference lay the seeds of future tragedy. But perhaps most damning was his inability to trust completely. Luther, once his closest companion, began to feel the widening gulf between them. The Lion's ascension to Primarch brought with it the cold wind of hierarchy. No longer brothers in arms, they became superior and subordinate. And even as the Lion offered Luther honor and command, he withheld intimacy and recognition. The man who had saved him from the dark forests of Caliban was now just another officer in a legion filled with warriors who barely remembered their homeworld. This detachment, this emotional austerity, was not cruelty. It was self-preservation. The Lion saw too deeply into the hearts of men to give his own freely. He knew that love could become weakness, that brotherhood could mutate into betrayal. And so he kept his secrets close, his plans tighter, his circle ever smaller. This was not arrogance, it was fear. Because deep down, the Lion understood something even his brothers did not. The galaxy was not built on honor or loyalty. It was built on lies that men agree to believe. And if those lies cracked, everything would burn. So he armored himself in silence, built a legion of knights too proud to speak truth, and turned his back on the one man who had truly known him. The tragedy of Lionel Johnson is not that he was betrayed, it is that he expected it. And in that expectation, in that cold preparation for the inevitable fracture, He may have created the very betrayal he sought to avoid. Before the heresy, before Horus, before Terra burned, there was a lion, prowling the edges of light, never truly trusting that the sun would rise again. The First Legion was unlike any other. Even among the Emperor's chosen sons, the Dark Angels were singular, ancient, refined, and terrifying in their silence. They were forged first, tempered in the earliest fires of the Great Crusade, and made to be the pattern from which all others would be measured. Their armor bore no ornamentation. Their rituals were older than memory. And their pride? It ran deeper than loyalty itself. They were not made to follow. They were made to judge. When the Lion took command of the Dark Angels, he inherited more than a legion. He inherited a mystery. These warriors had already carved legends across 1,000 systems. They spoke in tongues no longer used. Their inner circles moved in shadows, their traditions rooted in some unknowable past, even before the Lion was found. To integrate with them was not a matter of command, it was a matter of domination. And Lion Elginson, as always, did not ask to be accepted. He simply made himself absolute. Under his leadership, the Dark Angels became something sharper, colder, and far more distant. Their campaigns were marked by unmatched precision and ruthlessness. They did not fight with glory in mind, they fought with the weight of judgment. To watch them descend upon a world was to witness inevitability made manifest. And yet, beneath that veneer of unity, fractures began to grow. Not loud, not open, but subtle. Hushed, the kind of rift born not from defiance, but from suppressed identity. Many of the original Calibanite recruits, warriors shaped by the Order and devoted to Luther, began to feel a spiritual estrangement. The Legion's Terran veterans, older and molded by the Unification Wars, regarded the Calibanites as provincial, and the Calibanites, in turn, saw the Terrans as relics of a past that had no place on their world. The Lion, with his unyielding focus on efficiency, did little to ease these tensions. In truth, he may not have even noticed. Or if he did, he chose to ignore them, believing that discipline would extinguish doubt. But the truth was more complex. The Legion's inner orders, secret societies within the Legion, like the Dreadwing, the Iron Wing, the Deathwing, began to operate with increasing autonomy. While nominally loyal to the Lion, many of their loyalties remained entwined with their own internal codes and hierarchies. Some whispered that these orders held knowledge that even the Lion did not possess. Others claimed they kept ancient oaths to long-dead lords of Terra or Caliban. And then there was the matter of Luther. Though officially second in command, his role became increasingly symbolic. He was given honors, but not power. Given respect, but not purpose. His command postings were often far from the front lines, managing the homeworld, overseeing recruitment and logistics. Vital, but distant. Many Calibanites saw this as an insult. Their champion, the man who had stood at the Lion's side in the darkest nights of Caliban, was now reduced to a steward. And Luther himself, ever charismatic, began to gather a quiet following among those who felt alienated by the new order. This was not sedition, not yet. It was something far more dangerous. Nostalgia, wounded pride, and the creeping belief that perhaps the Lion did not understand his own sons. Perhaps he had outgrown them. Perhaps, in the cold logic of the Imperium, there was no room left for knights or chivalry or the old ways of Caliban. The Dark Angels, in their silence, became a legion of masks. On the surface, they were unified, flawless. But beneath that surface were conflicting oaths, hidden resentments, and loyalties torn between Terra and Caliban, between the Emperor and the Lion, between honor and shame. Every campaign they fought was another stone added to the fortress of silence that surrounded them. Every victory was stained with the quiet sense that something vital was being lost. And the Lion, for all his brilliance, did not see that the Legion was beginning to mirror his own soul. Disciplined, yes, but fragmented. Proud but isolated, hiding pain behind ritual, hiding betrayal behind silence. The First Legion was meant to be a weapon. Instead, it became a wound, deep, elegant, and festering. A legion that would one day turn on itself not with rage, but with the sorrow of brothers who no longer recognized one another. Caliban was never truly tamed. For all the Lion's victories, for all the banners raised and monsters slain, the soul of the world remained coiled like a serpent beneath the stone. To outsiders, Caliban was a verdant paradise, a jewel of knightly virtue reclaimed from darkness. But to those who walked its forests, who studied its ancient ruins, who knelt in its silent cathedrals, Caliban was a world filled with echoes. And those echoes whispered of things forgotten, or perhaps deliberately buried. The planet had always been divided, not just between civilization and wilderness, but between competing visions of what it meant to live with honor. The Order, which had raised both the Lion and Luther, believed in strength, hierarchy, and the unbreakable bond of oaths. But even within its ranks, tensions brewed. Other knightly houses resented the Order's growing dominance, and though the monstrous beasts of the forest united them in fear, that unity frayed the moment the beasts were gone. For when the Lion slew the last of Caliban's great terrors, he did something no warrior was meant to do. He ended the reason for unity. With the monsters dead, what remained was pride, ambition, and old grudges. The knightly orders, now without a common foe, turned their eyes toward influence, legacy, and theology. Some whispered that the Lion was not a savior, but an outsider, a child of the deep woods who imposed an alien vision of order. Others began to question whether the emperor himself, when he arrived, truly had the right to claim dominion over Caliban. The Imperium's integration only worsened things. Technological uplift brought wonders and horrors. The Mechanicum unearthed ancient machines from Caliban's depths, devices that defied explanation and carried sigils not of the Imperium, but of far older powers. The Librarius archives record that certain ruins were sealed without study, and that some scholars, after glimpsing their contents, requested reassignment or took vows of silence. It was as if Caliban had a secret history, one the Lion refused to share, or perhaps feared to confront. The people of Caliban changed as well. As the world became a recruitment ground for the First Legion, its youth were reshaped into transhuman warriors, stripped of memory and culture. Those left behind, families, scholars, minor nobility, began to feel like relics in their own homeland. The Imperium had promised enlightenment, but delivered displacement. And the Lion, distant and cold, rarely spoke to his people. He ruled them from orbit, from war fronts, from the silence of his chamber, like a god who had already outgrown his worshippers. This emotional exile was felt most by Luther. He remained on Caliban longer than most of the Legion. Charged with maintaining order, overseeing new initiates, and representing the Lion's will, he became a symbol both of pride and of frustration. The people still loved him. He walked among them, listened to their grievances, reassured them with the easy charisma that had once bound him to the Lion. But that love curdled, because for all his influence, he had no real power. Every decree came from orbit. Every major decision was filtered through the Legion's increasingly impersonal machinery. And slowly, a narrative emerged. Whispers in the nightly halls, sermons from embittered clerics, conversations in taverns and academies. They asked, had the Lion abandoned them? Had Caliban traded one tyrant, the beasts of the forest, for another cloaked in ceramite and silence? And was Luther not the true son of Caliban, the one who had always been there, who had never left? The fracture that grew was not military. It was spiritual. A question of identity. Caliban was no longer sure it wanted to be part of the Imperium, and some were not sure the Lion ever belonged to Caliban in the first place. By the time the Horus heresy began to ripple across the stars, Caliban was already burning. Not in fire, not yet, but in belief. The seeds of rebellion were not sown by treachery or demonic whisper. They were born from the soul of a planet that could not recognize itself, and saw in the Lion not a father returned, but a stranger in familiar armor. It was not heresy that came first. It was disillusionment. And in that quiet, growing void, a betrayal more intimate than any other began to bloom. Luther was not a traitor in the beginning. He was a man of immense conviction, loyalty, and pride, all virtues that, twisted just slightly, become the seeds of damnation. Long before the accusations, before the schism, before the fall, he was the heart of Caliban. Where the Lion was mystery, Luther was clarity. Where the Primarch brooded in silence, Luther spoke plainly, looked men in the eye, and remembered their names. The people loved him, the knights revered him, and perhaps most importantly, the young Astartes, those newly recruited from Caliban's soil, saw in him something they could understand. He was a bridge to their humanity, a voice of home in a legion becoming increasingly alien. When the Lion ascended to the heavens and embraced the Emperor's destiny, Luther followed without question. He believed in the lion, saw in him a god touched by fate. But that faith, absolute and unshaken, began to erode not through conflict, but through absence. The lion grew more distant, consumed by war and the weight of the crusade. And Luther, always just one step behind, began to feel like a shadow in his own story. The tragedy of Luther is that his fall was not a single moment. It was 1,000 small silences, orders delivered without explanation, campaigns fought without thanks, praise that never came. And in the corridors of the Legion, he began to notice the shift. The younger officers, those raised on Terra or molded entirely in the lion's image, regarded him as an artifact, necessary perhaps, but not essential. His authority was respected on paper, but questioned in private. His decisions were second-guessed, his motives scrutinized. When the lion sent him back to Caliban, ostensibly to oversee recruitment, planetary defense, and integration into the wider Imperium, it was framed as an honor. But Luther knew. He felt the weight of exile. It was a polite banishment, a command veiled in ceremony. He would not be at the forefront. He would not ride at the lion's side in the greatest crusades. He would be left behind to watch, to wait, to fade. And yet, Caliban welcomed him. The people remembered. They cheered his return, filled the halls with songs, rekindled old fires. To them, he was not second. He was their true son. And so began the rebirth of his purpose. No longer a servant of the Legion's hierarchy, he became a leader of Caliban in truth. The knightly orders turned to him for guidance. The planetary governors deferred to him. And among the Astartes stationed there, many of them Calibanite by birth, loyalty began to shift. But it was not ambition that drove Luther. Not at first. It was vindication. He believed he had been wronged. That the lion, blinded by his own myth, had forgotten the men who made him. That the Imperium, in its cold perfection, had lost the soul that Caliban once offered. And so Luther preached unity, pride, the preservation of Calibanite tradition. He did not speak against the lion, not directly, but every word carried a note of bitterness. Every celebration of Caliban was an indictment of how it had been abandoned. As the heresy erupted across the stars, Luther remained silent. No alliances with Horus, no demonic rites, just a slow, creeping sense that the Imperium's war was not his, that if the galaxy burned, perhaps Caliban should be spared, even sealed away. Protected from the madness, preserved. But among his followers, more radical voices began to emerge. Those who whispered that the lion had betrayed them, that the emperor was not a savior, but a tyrant who had claimed Caliban's best and left it hollow, that Caliban should not serve, it should rule. When word came that the lion would return to Caliban, victorious from the far reaches of the heresy, something in Luther broke. This was the moment, the reckoning. Would he kneel once more, accept his banishment in silence, or would he finally act, not in rage, but in a twisted form of justice? The rebellion that followed was not just strategic, it was emotional. The product of years of buried resentment, pride scorned, and love turned sour. Luther did not raise his hand against the lion out of hatred. He did it because he believed he was right, that the lion had lost his way, that Caliban deserved better. And that is the true horror, not that Luther fell, but that he thought he was saving something, that in turning his back on the lion, he believed he was preserving what had once made the Dark Angels great. He was wrong. But in that tragic certainty, he became the father of a lie so vast, so consuming, that 10,000 years later, the legions still cannot speak its name. Some betrayals do not erupt in a single, blinding act of violence. They whisper, they linger, they crack foundations long before walls collapse. The Dark Angel's fracture was not born on the battlefield. It was cultivated in silence, growing like rot beneath marble. For years, the Legion had stood as a paragon of discipline and mystery. But within that rigid facade, emotions twisted into barbed wire. Pride curdled into resentment, obedience into suppression, and loyalty into something far more dangerous: expectation. The seeds of division were never obvious. They didn't march or scream. They sat in mess halls, in the quiet glances between Calibanite recruits and Terran veterans. They lingered in strategic briefings, where orders from the lion were followed with military precision but received with private doubt. The First Legion had always prided itself on its internal structures, the orders, the circles, the unforgiven. But these structures meant to protect began to isolate. Warriors spoke in codes, cliques formed around shared heritage, and an invisible wall grew between those loyal to the Lion and those who followed Luther's legacy. Luther himself didn't light the match, he simply gave the fire a hearth. On Caliban, his charisma found new fuel in the disaffected. The Lion, too consumed by galactic warfare, failed to notice just how deeply the divide had grown. He trusted in order, in hierarchy, in fear. But fear does not bind the soul. It binds behavior. And beneath that surface compliance, hundreds, perhaps thousands, of Astartes began to question what they were truly fighting for. Some believed the Imperium had corrupted the Lion, that in trading Caliban's purity for the Emperor's vision, he had lost himself. Others saw Luther as the true heir of the Order, the spiritual successor to the ideals that had once guided them through Caliban's darkest nights. These were not heretics, not yet. They wore the same armor, fought with the same fury, but their hearts beat out of sync with the Lion's silence, and that dissonance was lethal. The Legion's structure exacerbated the problem. Its inner circles, the Death Wing, the Dread Wing, the Fire Wing, operated in semi-autonomy. Their knowledge was compartmentalized, their loyalty focused not to the Legion as a whole, but to their own esoteric codes. When signs of unrest emerged, they were buried. Not out of malice, but tradition. The Dark Angels had always solved problems internally. To expose weakness was to invite shame. And so, like dutiful sons afraid to displease a distant father, the Legion turned inward, concealing its growing sickness behind ceremony and ritual. Worse still was the Lion's blindness. He was a brilliant strategist, a tactician without peer, but he had never been a man of hearts. He commanded loyalty, not affection. When news of minor insubordination reached him, he did not investigate the soul, he corrected the symptom. Reassignments, reprimands, quiet punishments masked as logistical reshuffles. Each action widened the rift, not closed it. Some officers began to double-speak, affirming loyalty to the Lion in public, while echoing Luther's discontent in private. A few elite units stationed on Caliban became de facto private armies, more aligned with Luther's philosophies than the wider Legion's doctrines. And even among the high command, silent votes were cast. If a choice had to be made, between the Emperor's Imperium and Caliban's independence, many had already made it in their hearts. The heresy elsewhere was a thunderclap. Horus's rebellion shocked the galaxy into open war, but for the Dark Angels, the storm had already been brewing. Horus simply gave cover for what was already poised to erupt. With the legions scattered across the stars and the Lion racing toward battle after battle, Caliban became a crucible. The Astartes stationed there began to train with a new urgency, not for the Emperor's campaigns, but for something closer, more personal. They prepared to fight not aliens, not traitor legions, but brothers. By the time the Lion turned his fleet homeward, triumphant and weary, he did not return to a hero's welcome. He returned to a world bristling with defensive batteries, manned by sons who had already decided he no longer ruled them. And when the first ships entered orbit, there were no salutes, no parades, just silence. Then fire. The betrayal was not an explosion, it was an unveiling. A truth too long hidden, now made manifest in the roar of planetary weapons and the silent scream of broken brotherhood. And yet, even in that moment of rupture, many among the legions still wore their insignia with pride. They still called themselves Dark Angels. They did not think they had fallen. They thought they had been forced to rise. That is what makes this betrayal more devastating than the heresy itself. It was not born of chaos, it was born of conviction. A conviction so pure it believed itself righteous, even as it turned blade against blood. The Lion's return to Caliban was not meant to be a reckoning, it was meant to be a homecoming. After years of brutal warfare, of watching the galaxy tear itself limb from limb, he sought sanctuary in the place where it all began. Caliban had always been distant in his mind, a planet remembered more in silence than in sentiment. But as the fires of the Horus heresy flickered out, as the Legion limped home bearing scars no time could heal, the Lion believed perhaps, just perhaps, that some fragment of peace remained. He was wrong. The siege was not a single battle, it was a confession delivered in fire. As the Lion's fleet emerged from the warp expecting banners, processions, perhaps even reverence, they found instead a defensive grid activated, shields raised, and planetary cannons trained on the heavens. The first salvos struck without warning, not as a test, as a declaration. The betrayal shattered the First Legion. On board the fleet, confusion reigned. Loyalist Astartes could not comprehend what they were witnessing. Caliban, sacred Caliban, was firing on its own. And the orders that followed were not laced with hesitation. They were commands for full retaliation. The lion did not plead, he did not parley. He did what he had always done. He struck. What followed was a war unlike any other in the history of the Legiones Astartes. A civil war contained within the confines of a single world, but with implications that would echo for millennia. The skies above Caliban became a graveyard of shattered cruisers and burning drop pods. Orbital insertions turned into slaughter, as loyalist squads were ambushed by brothers they once trained beside. Entire wings of the fortress monastery defected mid-battle, switching banners, turning guns, embracing rebellion in the name of a man they believed to be their true leader, Luther. And at the heart of the storm, the lion descended. He did not speak to Luther. Not at first. There were no messages sent, no demands for surrender. The lion, whose soul had long ago calcified into command and consequence, landed amidst the fire with a purpose darker than vengeance. He was not there to negotiate. He was there to end it. The battle for the fortress was apocalyptic. Ancient halls built in reverence to the order cracked beneath orbital bombardment. Libraries filled with the wisdom of pre-imperial Caliban were incinerated. Statues of heroes, and of the lion himself, were shattered by cannon fire and crushed beneath falling rubble. And still the traitors held fast, fighting with a fury born not of heresy, but of belief. Luther had not summoned daemons. He had not sworn to chaos. That was what made it worse. He had betrayed not for power, but for ideology, for a dream of Caliban preserved from the rot of the wider galaxy. And in that dream, he was willing to kill his brother. The final confrontation between the lion and Luther was the stuff of dark myth. It took place in the deepest sanctum of the fortress monastery, surrounded by ruin, fire, and death. What was said between them, if anything, remains unknown. The records are gone. The survivors silenced. But what is known is this: they fought. Two legends, two fathers of the First Legion, blades drawn not in wrath, but in tragedy. And then something tore. The warp itself screamed. A rift, perhaps conjured by the emotional intensity of the moment, or perhaps called by forces neither man truly understood, opened within the heart of Caliban. Reality buckled. Half the planet was annihilated in the resulting cataclysm. The loyalists were cast into the void or pulled into the warp. The traitors, now called the Fallen, vanished entirely. Not slain, not captured, gone. Scattered across time and space by a power no one controlled. Luther was found broken, not physically, spiritually. He sat in the ruin of the fortress weeping, unable to remember why he had fought. His mind had snapped, not from guilt, but from grief. And the lion, mortally wounded, was taken away, not by medics, not by ships, but by myth. His body was never recovered. Some say he was spirited into stasis by the Watchers in the dark, hidden beneath the ruins of Caliban in an eternal slumber. Others believe he died with the last light of his homeworld. In truth, the siege of Caliban was not a war. It was an exorcism. The First Legion tore out its own heart to stop it from beating against its will. And yet, even after all that, the Legion did not confess. They did not explain. They did not mourn publicly. The Dark Angels would henceforth bear their name with new weight, a name not of honor, but of burden. For in destroying their past, they also destroyed the one thing that could have saved them: truth. The Dark Angels were never the same after Caliban. The explosion had scarred more than the surface of their homeworld. It had sundered their identity, their history, and their trust. What remained of the First Legion limped back into imperial service, claiming loyalty, displaying piety, swearing oaths with the same stone-cold precision that had once made them feared across the galaxy. But beneath the green armor and the iron discipline was a secret so profound, so damning, that even to acknowledge it would risk the destruction of everything they still claimed to serve. Half their legion had turned, not to Horus, not to chaos, but against their own. Their sin was not rebellion against the Emperor, but fratricide, the unforgivable betrayal of their own blood. And so in the ashes of Caliban, the Dark Angels made a decision. They would never speak of what happened, not to their allies, not to the High Lords of Terra, not even to the Inquisition. The shame was too great, the implications too vast. To survive, they would bury the truth. The cover-up began not with lies but with omission. Reports were altered, records were purged, astropaths who had witnessed the siege of Caliban were quietly silenced or reassigned. The planet itself was declared a casualty of warp instability, another tragic victim of the heresy's aftermath. No mention was made of Luther, no fallen were acknowledged, and when questioned, the Dark Angels offered only silence, or cryptic responses shrouded in tradition and ritual. Internally, however, the truth was etched into their very structure. The surviving inner circles of the Legion, the Death Wing, the Dread Wing, the mysterious and rarely spoken of Circle of the Unforgiven, became guardians of this secret. A new hierarchy was born, one not based solely on rank or valor, but on knowledge. Only those deemed worthy and unshakably loyal were slowly, painstakingly initiated into the truth of the fallen. It was not just an honor, it was a burden, a curse. For every fallen still alive was a living piece of the lie. Every one of them, scattered across the galaxy by the warp's fury, was a potential breach in the silence. And so the Dark Angels took upon themselves a mission unlike any other, the hunt. Quiet, relentless, eternal. It was not for glory, it was not even for vengeance, it was for containment. The Imperium never knew the full story. Other chapters who once fought alongside the Dark Angels noticed changes, colder command structures, sudden disappearances, strange operations with no explanations. Inquisitors, even the most ruthless, found their investigations thwarted, redirected, or mysteriously forgotten. And in the darkest corners of the galaxy, whispers grew, of angels hunting their own, of knights with no master, of truths so old and so terrible that even the ecclesiarchy dared not name them. What makes the cover-up so chilling is not just its scope, but its success. The Dark Angels became myth within myth, a chapter whose silence was deeper than death. And that silence bled into their culture. New recruits were indoctrinated not just into martial discipline, but into an atmosphere of secrecy, compartmentalization, and suspicion. Bonds of brotherhood were tested not through camaraderie, but through loyalty to a truth that could never be spoken aloud. Even among themselves, Dark Angels began to speak in riddles, to trust only those within their inner circle. Entire companies were structured around who knew and who didn't. The Codex Astartes was followed only superficially. Beneath it lay the real command structure, the real purpose, guarding the secret. And yet, this obsessive need to conceal bred its own dangers. The line between honor and fear blurred. The pursuit of the fallen became not just a mission, but an obsession. Entire campaigns were derailed to capture a single renegade. Allies were left to die, planets abandoned, all in service of retrieving one of the lost. When questioned, the Dark Angels offered no answers. They simply vanished. There were even rumors, unconfirmed but persistent, that those who learned the truth without permission were executed, regardless of loyalty. Not because they were traitors, but because they knew. And knowing was a threat. In burying their shame, the Dark Angels became prisoners of it. Every action they took, every war they fought, was shaped by the need to maintain the silence. They did not serve the Emperor alone, they served the lie. And in doing so, they became the most terrifying kind of warrior. Not those who fight for glory or justice or even vengeance, but those who fight so that a secret might die with them. And still, they remain the Emperor's angels. Still they fight, still they win. But in the dead of night, when the battle ends and the stars burn cold, they ask themselves, are we still loyal, or are we just afraid? That is the cost of the cover-up, not just truth buried, but identity, fractured forever. Across the galaxy in the darkest corners of forgotten worlds, they walk alone. The fallen, once proud sons of Caliban, now hunted without mercy by the very brothers who once bled beside them. To the Imperium, they are myths, whispered rumors of traitor Astartes who do not bear the marks of chaos, yet flee from the Emperor's justice. But to the Dark Angels, they are far more than traitors. They are living proof of a sin that must never be revealed. The hunt is not a crusade. It is not sanctioned by the High Lords, nor recorded in any imperial chronicle. It is a shadow war, waged across centuries, across realities, in silence and secrecy. Its only goal, to find and capture every last one of the fallen. Not to judge, not to kill, but to silence. Forever. When a fallen is located, the chapter mobilizes with terrifying precision. Whole companies may be diverted, campaigns are abandoned mid-battle, allies are lied to, manipulated, or even eliminated. The importance of the mission outweighs everything. Victory, survival, diplomacy, all become secondary. The fallen must not escape, not because they pose a threat to the Imperium, but because they pose a threat to the lie. What makes the hunt so chilling is its desperation. The Dark Angels do not pursue out of vengeance, they pursue out of fear. Every fallen captured is a potential confession. Every whispered word, every intercepted message, every breath they take risks unraveling the truth the chapter has buried for 10,000 years. And so they hunt, not just to atone, but to ensure that their shame remains entombed in silence. The captured are not executed. That would be too simple. Instead, they are taken to the Rock, the mobile fortress monastery carved from the last remnants of Caliban itself. There, beneath layers of stone and steel, in chambers unspoken of in any codex, they are interrogated, not for information, not for intelligence, but for penance. Some resist, others repent. A few, broken by years in the warp and lifetimes of guilt, beg for absolution. But no matter their response, the outcome is the same. They disappear. Not into death, into oblivion. Even those within the higher circles of the unforgiven rarely know the fates of the fallen once they are taken. It is said that the inner circle, the highest echelons of Dark Angel command, keeps them locked away in silence, perhaps hoping that one day, true redemption can be found. But what does redemption mean when the sin itself is unspeakable? Among the fallen, stories vary. Some claim they were misled, told by Luther that the lion had betrayed them, that the emperor was corrupt, that Caliban had to be saved from its own damnation. Others admit they acted in fear or pride or rage. A few still cling to the belief that they were right, that their rebellion was the only moral path in a galaxy drenched in tyranny. And then there are the truly tragic. Those who did not fall by choice, who were swept up in a moment, manipulated by commanders, unaware of the true nature of the conflict until it was too late. These are the ones the Dark Angels fear most, because their guilt is not guilt, it is grief. And if the Imperium knew that these men were still being hunted, still being punished for a war they did not choose, what would that say of the First Legion? It is not just the Dark Angels who participate in the hunt. The Unforgiven, successor chapters formed from the broken remnants of the First Legion, share in this duty. The Angels of Absolution, the Angels of Redemption, the Angels of Vengeance, each bears the same burden, the same oaths, the same silence. They do not always agree, they do not always cooperate, but on one thing they are united: the fallen must be found, and none must ever know why. In truth, the hunt has become a ritual, not just of justice but of identity. It defines the Dark Angels. It gives them purpose beyond war. It gives them a reason to exist, even as the galaxy crumbles around them. But that purpose is a cage, and with every fallen they capture, the bars grow thicker. There are whispers, even among the inner circle, that the hunt will never end, that it cannot. Because if the Dark Angels were to find and redeem every last fallen, then they would have to speak the truth. They would have to face what they did. And that, more than any traitor, more than any daemon, more than any Xenos threat, is the one enemy they cannot face. So they hunt, in silence, in shadow, in shame, and the secret bleeds on. The Emperor's gaze is said to be all-seeing. His mind, a vast and unknowable engine of destiny, stretches across realities, time, and possibility. It is said he saw the Great Crusade before it began, foresaw the heresy, foresaw even his own fall. If that is true, if he is truly as omniscient as his myths claim, then the question must be asked: does the Emperor know what the Dark Angels did? There are two schools of thought, each terrifying in its own right. The first believes he does not know, that the veil cast over the First Legion was so complete, so absolute, that even the Emperor was kept in the dark. After all, the siege of Caliban occurred at the height of galactic chaos. The Imperium was splintered, communications broken, entire sectors falling into silence. It is entirely plausible that Caliban's destruction was buried in the fog of war, its records lost, its survivors unwilling or unable to speak, and in the Emperor's broken, throne-bound state, perhaps the psychic screams of a legion dying on its own blade were simply lost in the cacophony of galactic collapse. But if that is true, if the Emperor truly does not know, then it means the Dark Angels have lived for 10,000 years beneath a lie even the master of mankind does not suspect. It means they walk among the Adeptus Astartes, among the High Lords, among the fabric of the Imperium itself, as wolves in the Emperor's flock. Not traitors, not loyalists, something else entirely, unspoken, unclassified, dangerous. And if the Emperor ever did find out, what then? But the second possibility is worse. Far worse. What if he already knows? What if, as many suspect, the Emperor's mind still watches from the Golden Throne, trapped but conscious, stretched thin across the skeins of time, and fully aware of what transpired on Caliban? What if he felt the warp rift open during the Lion and Luther's duel? What if he heard the cries of the dying legionaries, the screams of brother turning on brother? What if he saw Luther fall not just in battle, but into despair? And then, what if he chose to do nothing? This is where the theory becomes unbearable. Because if the Emperor knows the truth and allows the lie to stand, then he is complicit in it. Which means the cover-up is not just the Dark Angel's burden, it is part of the design, part of the plan. And that raises even darker questions. Why? Perhaps he believes the shame makes them stronger, that the weight of guilt will forge an unbreakable resolve, that by hunting their own sins, they will never forget the price of failure. Perhaps he understands that in a galaxy descending into madness, the truth no longer serves order, only silence does. Or maybe, just maybe, he forgives them. Maybe the Emperor sees the betrayal not as an act of evil, but as a tragedy, one born from confusion, isolation, and the terrible flaws he himself placed in the Primarchs. Maybe he sees the Dark Angels not as heretics, but as victims of his own design, and chooses to allow them their illusion of honor because he knows how close they came to being destroyed by it. But there's a third possibility, one that chills even the most devout members of the inner circle. What if the Emperor sees their lie and simply doesn't care? What if, in his immense and dying mind, the sins of a single legion are nothing compared to the rot consuming the Imperium itself? What if he has already judged them and found them irrelevant? What if the punishment is not excommunication or damnation, but indifference? The Dark Angels do not know, they cannot know, and so they continue the hunt. They maintain the silence, they cleanse, purge, and capture in the name of a truth that might already be known and ignored. Because the greatest fear of the First Legion is not that the Emperor will discover their secret, it's that he already has, and turned his back. They call themselves the Unforgiven, a name that once spoke of purpose, but now echoes with damnation. Not just the Dark Angels, but all their successor chapters, bound by shared shame, locked in an endless secret war against the fallen. But what does it mean to live as one of the Unforgiven? What does it do to a warrior's soul to wake each day not as a servant of the Emperor's light, but as a jailer of a forgotten truth? This is the cost few speak of. Not the secrecy, not the manipulation, but the slow erosion of the self. The Unforgiven do not merely carry out the hunt, they are shaped by it. Each chapter has evolved its own methods, its own doctrines, its own means of managing the impossible tension between outward loyalty and inward guilt. The angels of absolution proclaim they are already absolved, that their duty is only to finish what was begun. The angels of vengeance refuse to forgive or forget, even as they butcher the galaxy in search of penance. The angels of redemption walk a razor's edge, many among them dangerously close to the fallen in both ideology and belief. Yet no matter the mask each chapter wears, they all follow the same law: secrecy above all. They recruit, train, and deploy like any other Adeptus Astartes. But behind the scenes, their inner circles operate with chilling efficiency, dissecting battlefields for hints of the fallen, leveraging astropathic networks and informants, and sometimes even striking deals with rogue agents or inquisitors who get too close to the truth. There are entire companies within the Unforgiven who exist solely for this mission, their members handpicked not for valor or leadership, but for silence. Initiates are selected young, not for their strength, though that matters, but for their pliability, their ability to forget, to obey, to kill without asking why. Most will never know the truth. Most will die without ever realizing what they were truly fighting for. But a few, a very few, ascend. They are pulled aside in the dark of night, brought before hooded figures, interrogated, examined, And if they are judged worthy, they are shown a fraction of the truth. Not all of it, never all of it. Only enough to begin the long, slow descent into the circle of the unforgiven. Once inside, there is no return. These warriors change, something in them calcifies. They become hollow in subtle ways. Their brotherhood grows tighter but colder. Their laughter disappears. Their questions stop. They speak in riddles. They do not rest. They do not trust. Because trust, once broken so deeply, becomes a thing you fear to feel again. And yet, they fight harder than any chapter in the Imperium. They storm bastions alone. They destroy planets to capture a single prisoner. They accept death with a serenity that borders on the pathological. They are not just soldiers. They are pilgrims of pain, crusaders against their own legacy. Every fallen they capture is a victory and a wound. Because every time they see one of their lost brothers, they are reminded, this could have been me. This could still be me. The psychological strain is immense. Chaplains whisper that some among the inner circle do not sleep, that they see the faces of the fallen in every shadow, that they fear their own doubts will one day make them one of the hunted. There are stories of interrogators who begged to be mind-wiped, who tried to erase what they had learned. Others simply vanished, officially reassigned, unofficially removed. And yet, the leadership of the unforgiven insists that this burden is holy, that it sets them apart, that it justifies their secrecy. But over 10,000 years, even dogma begins to decay. New generations of Astartes, raised in the shadow of this great lie, begin to question. Why are their actions hidden? Why are their victories never celebrated? Why do they abandon battlefields, allies, even entire worlds, for prisoners who do not exist? Some whisper of rebellion, not against the Imperium, but against the lie. They argue that the fallen should be judged openly, tried before the Emperor's light, that the sins of the past should be faced, not buried. But these voices are silenced. Not publicly, never with spectacle, just gone, disappeared into the rock, or transferred to distant campaigns, where death is almost certain. The truth is, the hunt has become a ritual of control. The inner circle needs it. It gives them purpose. It binds them in shared guilt. Without it, what are they? Just another chapter. Just another group of warriors. And perhaps that, more than anything, is why the secret is guarded so fiercely. Because if the truth were ever known, if the lie were broken, the unforgiven would be unmade, not by judgment, but by irrelevance. The irony is unbearable. In trying to preserve their honor, they have become enslaved by their dishonor. In silencing the past, they have doomed their future to repetition. They cannot forgive. They cannot forget. And so they fight, not for the Emperor, not for mankind, but for a silence that grows darker with every passing century. This is what it means to be one of the unforgiven. Not just to hunt the fallen, but to know that you are always one breath, one thought, one doubt away from falling yourself. And if you do, your brothers will come for you. Not with judgment, with silence. The rock is not just a fortress, it is a tomb. A fragment of Caliban wrenched from the dying planet and reforged into a mobile bastion, it drifts through the void as a relic, a weapon, and a confessional. To most of the Imperium, it is the mighty stronghold of the Dark Angels, a symbol of their martial prowess and strategic brilliance. But to those who know its true nature, those in the inner circle, it is a vault of sin, a place where the dead are never truly buried and the past never truly rests. Deep within the rock lie chambers no one speaks of, cells without names, vaults carved not from stone, but from guilt. The fallen are brought here, one by one, shackled in silence, stripped of identity. They are not prisoners in the conventional sense. There are no trials, no courts, no verdicts. Only interrogations that blur the line between justice and obsession. The interrogator chaplains who oversee these rituals are chosen not for mercy, but for endurance. They are men who have learned to kill without hate and to question without pity. In the dimly lit depths of the rock, they do not scream. They whisper, they coax, they accuse. They break down their former brothers not with pain, but with memory, with old war hymns, with the names of fallen comrades, with the agonizing echo of what they used to be. Some of the fallen resist until their minds shatter. Others yield quickly, desperate to explain, to atone, to be understood. And a few, in moments of terrifying clarity, do something worse. They forgive. They look into the eyes of their captors and speak not with bitterness, but with sorrow. They say you should have stood with us. And in those moments, the line between traitor and loyalist, between guilt and virtue, blurs into ash. No record exists of what happens after confession. Some whisper that repentant fallen are entombed forever, kept in stasis as monuments to the shame of the Legion. Others believe they are killed quietly, with a brother's blade, not in rage but in mourning. There are even darker theories, that their memories are extracted, studied, weaponized. That their souls are used in forbidden rituals to bind the warp-ruptured halls of the rock together. That their pain fuels something older than the Imperium. The chaplains never speak of it. Their faces are cold, their prayers hollow. They walk the halls of the rock like mourners at a funeral that never ends. Each of them carries the burden of countless confessions, countless lies. They begin to change, their voices flatten, their words become riddles. Some lose their names, others lose their will, and a few vanish into the catacombs below, never to return. But the greatest horror of the rock is not what it contains. It is what it doesn't. There are entire wings sealed shut, entire levels abandoned, places where the warp leaks through the stone, where echoes whisper even in the absence of life. It is said that the duel between the lion and Luther scorched reality itself, and that the rock still carries the wound. In some of the deepest vaults, time stutters. Voices speak in dead languages. Machines work without power. And in one chamber, known only to the Supreme Grand Master and a handful of the inner circle, lies something even more unthinkable. Luther, he was not executed. Not cast into the warp, not forgiven. He remains. What state he exists in is unknown. Some say he is comatose, locked in a psychic prison woven by the Watchers in the dark. Others claim he is awake, lucid, aware, and waiting. That he speaks only in riddles, quoting verses from Calibanite texts that no longer exist. That he dreams of the lion's return. And still the rock drifts, silent, massive, watchful. Its engines are ancient, older than the Imperium itself. Its vaults stretch beyond logic. Some believe it is sentient, that it chooses where to go, that it remembers, that it mourns. The Dark Angels say their fortress is impregnable, that no enemy can pierce its defenses. But the truth is, the greatest threat lies within, in every interrogation chamber, in every whispered confession, in every name etched into the walls in bloodless script. Because each one is a reminder that the sin was real, that the betrayal happened, that the hunt is not over. And somewhere deep within, where the stone cracks and reality frays, lies a simple, terrible question. What if one of them escapes? Not just physically, but truthfully. What if one of the fallen, or a broken chaplain, or a watcher whose loyalties shift like shadow, decides that the Imperium should know? That the lie should end? What happens when the secret bleeds beyond the rock? There is no protocol for that, no contingency plan, only silence. Because for all its power, the rock is not built to survive exposure. It is a fortress of denial, a cathedral to a sin too great to bear the light. If the truth ever escapes its walls, the First Legion may not fall in battle, it may collapse from within. And so the Dark Angels guard the rock not just as their base, their home, their pride, but as their curse. They orbit war zones, they descend in fury, they conquer in the Emperor's name, but always they return. To the silence, to the shame, to the rock, to the place where the truth is buried, and never ever allowed to die. There comes a point when silence becomes identity, when the lie you carry is so heavy, so defining, that you cannot imagine yourself without it. For the Dark Angels, this threshold was crossed long ago. They no longer merely hide the truth, they have become it. The unforgiven are not just warriors trapped in a mission. They are men who have shaped their souls to fit the shape of a wound. And after 10,000 years, the wound no longer bleeds. It whispers. What does it mean to exist in that space? To serve an Imperium you dare not tell the truth to? To kneel before the Emperor's throne knowing you have murdered your own and buried the story? To fight beside chapters who see only your discipline, your glory, your mystery, and who would draw blades the instant they knew what your silence really means. It means you cannot stop moving, cannot stop hunting. Because if the hunt ends, if the last of the fallen is caught, then what remains? An ending requires closure. But the Dark Angels are incapable of closure. They are not built for redemption. They are built for delay, for maintenance, for containment. They do not seek forgiveness. They seek to prevent discovery. And so the entire chapter, its rituals, its hierarchy, its myths, is structured not to heal the past, but to seal it away. Every initiation, every test, every elevation through the circles is not a reward, but a vetting, a psychological sieve. Can this one handle the truth? Can he be trusted with the horror? Not just to know it, but to carry it without cracking? To continue the mission without speaking a word? The Dark Angels speak often of duty, of loyalty. But what they rarely speak of is fear. Because behind every bolter shot, behind every flawless campaign, behind every act of fury wrapped in silence, lies that singular unspoken terror, exposure. Because they know, in the marrow of their gene-forged bones, that the Imperium does not forgive betrayal. The Ecclesiarchy, the Inquisition, the High Lords, they would not accept nuance. They would not study the past. They would not care that the fallen acted without chaos, without demonic pacts, without worship of the ruinous powers. They would not ask if the Dark Angels had tried to save their brothers. They would not look at Luther and see tragedy. They would see treason. And for the Imperium, treason must burn. That is the abyss the Dark Angels stand over every single day. And they have stared into it so long, they have begun to see their reflections in its depths. They call themselves the Emperor's first and finest. But in the privacy of the rock, in the cold silence of the Chapel of Fallen Names, some whisper doubts. Some wonder if they are still true angels or something else entirely. Something that cannot be redeemed because it no longer remembers what redemption feels like. And yet they fight. Every war zone, every battle is a performance, not just for the Imperium, for themselves. A reaffirmation that they still belong, that they are still worthy of the armor they wear, of the gene seed they carry. But it is a desperate thing, that proving, and it never ends. Worse still is the realization creeping into the inner circle, the slow, sickening understanding that they may never catch them all, that the warp scattered the fallen across not just space but time, that some may be lost to entire millennia, that others may have already died or found new identities or even repented on their own. The hunt may be eternal, not because the fallen evade them, but because the hunt sustains the chapter's illusion of control. And so the rituals intensify, the secrecy tightens, the silence grows heavier. The chaplains no longer speak of absolution. The librarians redact records without pause. The veterans of the Deathwing speak only in symbolic riddles. And in the deepest reaches of the rock, the Watchers in the dark, those strange, ageless entities who serve the lion and no one else, continue their silent vigil, their motives unknown, their allegiance unclear. Some among the younger Astartes have begun to sense the dissonance. They speak of strange dreams, of phantom voices heard during the rites of passage, of a sense that the truth is close, just beneath the surface. These whispers are watched closely. The inner circle knows the signs. Sometimes these initiates are tested, sometimes they are elevated, sometimes they are never seen again. And what of the lion? Some say he sleeps beneath the rock, encased in stasis, waiting for the moment he is needed most. Others believe he walks among the stars in secret, judging his sons from afar. But no matter where he is, his silence is felt. The lion is absence incarnate, the ultimate metaphor for the chapter itself. A father who cannot speak, a leader who cannot forgive, a ghost who watches over sons too afraid to ask for absolution. The Dark Angels do not speak of hope, they speak of vigilance. They do not seek the end of the hunt, they fear it. Because when it ends, they will be forced to ask the question they have avoided for 10,000 years. If we have hunted them all, if we have sealed the past, if none remain to carry the guilt, then why does the shame still burn? And what are we without it? The answer terrifies them, because they are not sure they are still the Emperor's angels. They may only be the remnants of a sin too heavy to die. And in the void between stars, in the silence that binds all secrets, they carry on. Not in glory, not in faith, in fear. If you've made it this far through the shadows and secrets of the First Legion and want to dive even deeper into the hidden truths of the 41st millennium, consider subscribing to the channel. We explore the lore that others fear to touch.